On the amendment I've filed and, and visiting with senators, I think there's an important distinction that needs to be made in the arguments that have been brought forward. The first is we have a mandated level of ethanol that has to be produced and blended into gasoline, and it grows from now on. There will be zero job losses if this amendment is improved. The second thing is my colleague, and I love him to death, from South Dakota, says we're going to save $1 billion. We can save $3 billion if we eliminate the VTEC blending subsidy. Now, why should we do that? Here's a subsidy that goes to all the blenders of gasoline in the United States, all of them. And they all have called and written and said, we don't want the $3 billion for the rest of the year. We don't want it. We actually have a letter here from the National Petrochemical and Refiners Association, which they're all members of, saying we don't want this money. So the best way to get money against the deficit is to not give money to people who don't want it on something that's already mandated anyway. I spent a great deal of time listening to my colleague from Iowa, Senator Grassley, and his figures were very good, but they were only up through 2008. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, 40% of last year's corn crop was utilized to convert to ethanol. Now, why would the American Bakers Association, the American Frozen Food Institute, the American Meat Institute, California Dairies, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, the International Dairy Foods Association, the Milk Producers Council, the National Chicken Council, the National Council of Chain Restaurants, the National Meat Association, the National Restaurant Association, the National Turkey Federation, the National Wildlife Federation, which is just about a third of people who are endorsing this, why would they be for this? Because it's not just less than 3% the cost of food. It has been, this last year, the significant driver. Corn prices are at $7.65 a bushel. They're 2.5 times what they were 3.5 years ago. And I'm not against the farm, and I'm for ethanol. I don't want to do away with ethanol blending. I don't want to do away with ethanol as a substitute. But we have a way to get the same amount of ethanol produced and put into our cars without spending $3 billion between now and the end of the year, or $5.8 billion is what it's averaged over the last few years. We've spent $34 billion of money we didn't have subsidizing something that's mandated. I mean, it even goes beyond the Reagan quote, which his was, government view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases: if it moves, tax it; if it keeps moving, regulate it; and if it stops moving, subsidize it. We have the incentive in to blend the ethanol. And that incentive is, you by law have to blend it. They don't have a choice. So we're going to use ethanol in this country. Now, another factor that the American people ought to take into consideration, when you go buy a gallon of fuel today, you already have $1.72 worth of subsidy in there. And that doesn't have anything to do with oil and gas drilling. That has to do with the subsidies that go to all this program for ethanol. And I'm for using cellulosic. I'm actually for using corn ethanol. I just don't think we ought to pay twice for it. I think we ought to pay once.